and that is queen to c2. But it turns out there's bishop h6 check. Oh, so sneaky.
Look at that.
Bishop is on the
Both
board.
bishops just cutting the board. So queen d5 is impossible. And let's say pawn takes now on d5.
Yes, and we probably would see bishop f5, the only move that makes sense and natural here, to go after the king. And if king c1 one more time, just queen c8, you cannot even block with the queen. And if you block with the knight, you're giving away for no reason, almost. So king to a1, you're just going to the file of the rook. And that's your only choice to survive.
There is no direct blow-off of the game.
No.
Rook a2 will not actually win the game.
Exactly.
Because king has a high
just
score.
takes, and then if queen a8, king goes to forward, to b3. Quite nice. And after king to a1, it looks like white relatively safe, and he's threatening to take b4 pawn. So because black doesn't have anything immediate, he can plan out rook a4, defending that, building up with either queen a8 or queen to d7, hitting the knight. Oh, it's interesting to hit the knight with queen d7 and bringing another rook, because right now knight doesn't have a square to get back.
Exactly. Very interesting sacrifice that Richard Rapport offered to Praggnanandhaa.
Sorry.
Sorry. Thank you. Okay, and Pragg takes with the pawn.
Pawn takes d5 on the board.
And look at this. Oh, wow. I think Pragg wanted to check how Richard is feeling, and he was staring at him directly in the face. Richard goes bishop to f5.
A strong move. Yeah, Richard is going for open dynamic game. King
And
goes
rook
a4.
a4. Wow. Blitzing out, leaving the board again.
He prepared those moves. He's ready. He calculated so far, and he knows if pawn to b3, he's gonna go to rook to a5, going after b5 knight.
Ivanchuk, we see Ivanchuk.
Yeah, he sees
observing.
like,
It's so interesting for him to see a game like this.
Okay, if queen takes b4. The thing is, after b3, the bishop, the long diagonal would open up. There would be some threats. Even just with maybe queen to e7. So that e4, queen goes to e5, gets to the checkmate, queen to b2. Okay, things looking really interesting, and queen to e7 is also letting the rook to join the game with rook c8 and rook c2. White's White's pieces are quite much slipping so far, so Richard Rapport is trying to get advantage of his slipping pieces, of Pragg's slipping pieces, as fast as possible. So rook a4, even though it's a kind of steady move with any forcing idea, it has a point. It has a point of attack, and yeah, White's another idea would be maybe going knight to c1 so that he can get his pieces out from f1 and h1. And I would say rook can come to c8 to c2 as well, besides going to a8. Oh, it's so double-edged. And the thing is, those bishop pair is so powerful, what Richard Rapport has. And maybe Richard is even planning to push on e4 at some moment. You can expect
that. I love this. Richard going all in. His opponent is also Praggnanandhaa, who is toughest opponent. He is the best defender. In yesterday's game with Parham, we had interview after the game. Parham was so funny. He said that after certain position, he would expect Pragg to resign at every move. And he was finding the best moves, and he was shocked with that. And he said Yes, and I told him as a joke, it was behind the cameras, and I was like, yeah, it seemed like he had 7 lives. And he was like, not 7, even more, I think 10 lives.
Yeah.
So that was really nice. It means that Pragg is the best defender, and he, you know what is his style? He defends it in an active way.
Yes, I mean,
He always keeps the chance for himself. If you make a mistake, I'm gonna score the full point, not the half point.
I mean, we said even in our previous stream several times that the best way you can defend is attack. That's a counterattack.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you're just defending, you're holding 2 results. That's if your opponent is not successful, you get the draw. That's a must. If your opponent is successful, you're losing. So it's always better to play for 3 results where you have a chance of winning rather than to just hold the game and hopefully opponent doesn't strike you kind of badly. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is all about the mindset. A lot of players, including myself, very often we are playing against the opponents, and it's a good approach to play against the chess pieces, the position you have at the moment, because you will not be distracted by the strength of your opponent. For today, the final game we will review before the first break is Parham against Ian Nepomniachtchi. Very important matchup as well between these 2 players. Parham is one of the leaders. He's just half a point behind the sole leader Abdusattorov, and Ian Nepomniachtchi has 2 points at this point.
So quite interesting.
We still have the Cotswold structure.
Yes, almost. Yeah, the pawn already pushed on c5, but not considered. And that today, even in this event overall, we have this kind of opening quite a lot. Yeah, quite a lot. So let's have a look. d4, knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, and bishop going to b4, Nimzovich variation, and we have seen e3, castle, bishop going to d3, and d5. So takes, a3, bishop to d6, knight, ge. Oh, no, we have queen c2 first. Wow. And the thing is, I have a little bit suspicion that Parham might have confused the opening a little bit, because he took a lot of time to make his queen c2 move, and after knight a6, his knight ge2 move.
Yeah, I think knight a6 was also a bit surprise for him, because knight a6 is not the square you bring this knight there. It clearly shows that you don't want to play knight to b4 because the pawns are controlling. So black's idea was to play c6 next move, knight to c7.
c5 immediate.
Yeah,
that
and
was
there's
done by Nepo.
Yeah, there was another idea. This is a good point, because it goes to another move. Instead of knight to g2, white could also play b4.
Oh, b4.
To sub c5 happening, yeah. And in this case, actually, after b4, somehow black has quite comfortable position with c6, knight c7, and to strike with a5 in the end.
Yes.
So white decided not to have that pawn structure and to allow c5 happening. Knight e2, c5 on the board, and
f3. Quite an interesting point by Parham. And rook e8 castle, knight c7, just a simple smooth continuation of bishop, just developing to d2. What's your perspective on bishop on d2? What's his future?
I think bishop wants to go to e1, f2, but the pawn now is hanging on e3, so that is not really a possibility anymore. And there's no way to guard this pawn. Like queen c1 will bring queen e7 as well on the board. So I think white will just try to play somewhere e4. That's probably the
E4.
future of the bishop. Rook d1 first. Rook d1 first to have this rook on d file. Here, black has to be careful not to close
Maybe
the
king
center.
h1 first, yeah, so that you
proper.
don't
It is very important not to close the center with black here. If you play somewhere c4, This bishop has a square to go on f5, which is fine. And after some trades, white has this powerful e4 push,
Yes.
and you close the center. So black will actually keep the pawn on c5 to have the dynamic center.
Yes. Another idea I had is maybe to get some game. I mean, yesterday we talked about isolated pawn, and I'm looking for that opportunity. Of course, this take immediately looks bad because it just takes and you're under pressure.
Yeah, you know how he could do that? He could, instead of castle, if we just come back, 2 more moves. After c5, yeah, 1 more move. Here, white could take on a6 first, get rid of the knight, double the pawns, now take on c5. And after bishop c5,
Then castle.
Castle, rook d1, and yeah. But again, this is the game for both sides. You have the isolated pawn and double pawns, but you have perf bishop, open files for the rook, and this is actually
And probably a
double-edged position.
Bishop a6.
Yeah, not. I don't think this is equal. Actually, I think it's double-edged position.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's both players' game.
So, yep. Bishop d2. So right now, if you look at the clock, yeah, because Parham thought very long earlier on queen c2 and knight e2 moves, he's a little bit down. But considering it's a classical time control, 90 minutes plus 30 seconds increment, and considering there's additional 30 minutes after 40 moves, it's not a huge difference having just 7 minutes right now.
Yeah,
it's quite okay.
Yeah, time is fine here. I would agree that this is quite extraordinary way to play with white, to have this f3 too early, to develop the pieces in this way. But it is very interesting what Parham has in his mind, because for sure he has a lot of ideas, and we will see that quite soon. What we're going to do now is we are going to take our first break, which will be a very short. And when we are back, we will be looking at the challengers games, also a lot of fight there. And meanwhile, guys, we do have a poll in our chat on YouTube. Go ahead and vote how many decisive games we're gonna have today. Already we have 147 votes. I also voted. I voted for 3 decisive results.
3, wow.
Yeah, 3
ambitious.
Yes, yesterday we had 4 decisive
4,
results.
yes. Oh, but on challengers we had 5 draws.
Yeah,
Look
on challengers we had 5 draws. But this question is, I think, mainly for masters. Yeah.
Yes.
So most of the people already voted for 2 decisive results. And we also have the option for 4 and more. So there is basically what I see now. People mostly believe that it will be more than 1, because the least percentage of people thinks that it is 1 decisive result.
Yeah, looking at the percentage, the amount of people that vote only 1 decisive result is the least.
Yes,
Wow.
yes.
People expecting a lot more.
Yeah, this is so far what we have been treated by the chess players here, all the good games and decisive results. So we have a belief. We do have over 300 people watching, and we have only 150 people voted. So guys, I encourage you to go ahead and vote for this question, and we might also have another poll running today in our chat. Thanks very much for being with us. We are taking now a short break. By the time we're back, we're gonna have more updates. So don't go anywhere. We'll be back shortly. And here we are back. This is UzChess 2025 here in Tashkent. We do have round 6 in progress, and also alongside with Masters tournament, we have Challengers, Future, and Open tournament. They play in the same venue. Open tournament is in the playing venue, obviously, but there is a bit of a difference on the time control. We do have a standard time control in the Masters with 30 minutes extra increment after 40 moves, but in the Challengers and in the Futures, we don't have that extra time for the players, and that means that games are more intense there. They have more time pressure on the clock, but the games are equally interested. We promise you that we're going to see the games also in the Challengers, and very interesting matchup. Hong Andre, who is one of the favorites of the event, plays against Vasyl Ivanchuk. Let's take a look. What is the situation?
So, yeah, interesting start by Andrew Huang. That's knight to f3. We have seen that knight f3 move quite a few times by Nikolas Theodorou. And today he's playing this white. We can even see that move on his game as well. So let's have a look at Andrew Huang's game against Vasyl Ivanchuk. And we have knight f3, c5. Look at that response. c4, knight c6. And he goes for English variation, symmetrical. g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7. Quite nice.
Yeah,
and
copying everything your opponent doing. That's a good idea. But latest move d4, you cannot copy anymore. You can play d5 here. You have to deviate here.
Yes, and here an interesting move by Vasyl Ivanchuk, and that is ignoring the pawn and just going for castle. And
what's the point of like, for instance, if I take now on c5?
Pawn takes c5. Yeah. You want to take the pawn? Okay. The opponent can go queen a5 and take the pawn back almost immediately in the next move. So that could be something, but the queen is already making a couple of moves, which means he's losing some tempos. And in the meantime, white can castle, if take, pawn to b3, ready to develop this bishop. However, exposing his knight and a rook on the diagonal that bishop can strike. So which means in this moment, d5 strike is kind of possible to make, where we could have seen on this line. It is still theory, I would believe. Yeah. So after bishop e3, queen to a5, there is immediate knight d5 as well, but after bishop e3, you are making room for your queen to protect, and you go for knight takes, takes, takes. You would let your opponent take your rook on a1, you take, he takes. It looks like black has up an exchange, but you are going bishop h6 next move. And even before doing bishop h6, because this queen and a knight is on the same line, you can have that knight d4 move, that bishop h6 later.
Yeah, wow. That's actually a very nice idea. Was possible to play very tough challenge for both sides to handle this position. But with white, Hung wanted to hold the center, and he decided to play d5 instead of taking the pawn on c5, hitting the knight, winning some tempo here, because this knight has to go back.
And besides, I would say getting some space advantage. That move has its own motives as well. After knight a5, knight to d2, another candidate move. There are two candidate moves to protect the pawn, that is b3 and knight to d2. And the third one would be queen to d3, a little bit not an ideal spot for your queen to go for. So we have seen knight to d2. Maybe the point is after doing that castle, when you do rook b1 and you want to strike to b4. You don't want to kind of wait and make your pawn protect this and expose yourself on that long diagonal.
Yeah.
So d6, castle, e5. Wow. An interesting structure. We are slowly transforming to Benoni, even I can say. So a6, there wasn't any captures. And b6, the game is relatively close, but I can see white having slight advantage because of the space he's controlling. Is he trying to take the knight? Is he trying to take the bishop? Why exactly bishop h6?
Well, this bishop was locked on g7 by its own pawn, and I think he is just pinning the knight, and his idea is to take dark square bishop, not the knight, because if you take the knight on d2, then you give up all your dark squares on the king side that you can't really control. But if white moves the knight on b3, then you are happy to take the bishop.
You're willing to exchange that, and as white has some space advantage, black has countered against strike after takes. This c4 is more or less becoming a liability for white and close to becoming backwards pawn.
Another idea bishop h6 is to stop f4 because it will be less powerful. Now I take on f4 and I play knight to h5.
Yes.
Attacking f4 right away. You cannot play knight f3 because you block the rook. You have to go knight to b3. And in that case, I can even bring my queen into the action, queen to h4.
Wow. Yeah, this game looks quite aggressive, and black is doing right actions. Yeah, bishop h6 is quite an interesting move, and Andrew Hong is thinking how to continue from here.
And time situation, 1 hour, 10 minutes against 53 minutes shows us that black is quite comfortable in this setup. And we can see Vasyl Ivanchuk is the star of our day. She's in all the cameras. She's just walking around thinking and tries to play very fast in this game. Let's go forward and check out the second board. Here we have already a lot of pieces traded.
Yeah, we are close to reaching endgame, you know. Once knights trade, it's like, and even bishops, there are like 2 pieces remain from typical endgame structures. Yeah, we're close to even rook endgame. But let's have a, and that trade is not even that far. It's just 1 move, and that trade is happening. Yeah, to be exact, if takes, seemingly equal, and white is pawned down, but his pieces are comparatively active. Wow. So let's have a look. How did we reach on this position? And so far, another interesting is both players have 2 points out of 5. So let's see. We had a similar structure, and wow, in Russian game we have that d4 move. Striking knight takes e4 and d takes e5. It's not similar structure. It's not Petrov anymore. Yeah.
Russian. So, I've never heard of Russian.
No Russian. How do we call this variation? Takes d6 Petrov?
Yeah.
We say both Russian and Petrov here. Yeah. So d4 takes, d takes e5, pawn to d5, knight bd2, bishop e7, takes, knight to d4, knight going to d7, hitting pawn on e5, bishop f4, protecting the pawn, and I guess we have said that g5 move. I'm like, the bishop is protecting, go after the defender, and there was g5 h5. Quite nice play by black. And considering black's time control, it was still within his theory. Yeah. h3, h4, bishop to h2, knight to c5. Opening up the way of his bishop. And making a room. Yeah, making a room for the bishop, but quite much I don't see further than d7. Okay, let's see how the game unfolded. Or maybe it's maneuvering to knight to e6. Long castle, pawn to c6. Bishop to c4, bishop to b6. Queens out of the board, and 1 piece also exchanged. The game was slowly heading to a draw, but both pawns looks... Usually you see your white pawn on e4, black pawn on e5, but right now, in this structure, it's vice versa. White pawn on e5 and black pawn on e4. So rook going to h1, a5, and pawn to e6. A really dynamic, interesting decision by white to go with momentum. What was other ideas? How about f3? Still keeping that pawn on e5. Maybe making that e6 later. If e takes f3, knight takes f3, and you're hitting g5 pawn.
I like that.
And guess how black can defend that pawn?
Bishop e6.
Yes, that's again indirect way of defending. You're counterattacking. In case of take, you're taking back. And protecting the pawn, and also making the room for your rook to get into the game really, really fast. So e6, we have seen bishop takes e6. I would say giving a bishop pair, but White didn't go for getting bishop pair. He just took with bishop. Takes, and right now we have seen bishop d6, and black is thinking. White's idea is simple. You want to take and take back, and then e4 is exposed. You want to take on e4. Once after taking c5. Right.
What should I do here with black? Shall I go king to f7 to guard e6 pawn?
That's also possible. I would say maybe. But you're dropping your e4 pawn, you know, you're protecting one pawn but dropping another, and e6 pawn still remains to be weak on this game.
Is there a way to protect both of them?
There is a way, but not both of them, yeah. And that way I earlier mentioned when we just got into the line that trading, you know, but how to trade that? Trading the knight is knight to d3. Two knights gonna get out of the board right now.
Knight d3.
You have no choice but take with the pawn, he takes, and you are dropping e4 pawn, but you are threatening f2 pawn.
So let's say rook
to
e4.
e4, bishop to f2, rook to e6, king to d7 here, even kind of slightly. Black is, I would say, better because his king is active and his king is behind that d pawn, so which means your rook is not attacking. And considering you have d3 pawn, it is isolated pawn. So yeah, if rook to g6, we want to trade that rook, and black's position looks quite nice.
Oh, there's actually a very smart way to deal with this position. Instead of 93.
Earlier on?
Because king has not moved, right? Can I still long castle here?
Long castle, yes, that's also possible.
I long castle, hit the bishop, he take the knight.
He takes,
second knight.
You take, I guess.
Yeah,
yes.
you take. I
F2?
take. First on d1, because
d1.
rook is hanging.
Okay. Although, if you're taking, you're counterattacking as well.
Yeah, let's take first rook.
Let's take first rook.
Rook takes. Rook, bishop f2.
Bishop f2.
And point being that you cannot take on g5 because of bishop e3. Yeah. Bishop
there is bishop e3 even. Yeah. Just. And actually here, White did have a choice of taking with the king as well, going and take e4 pawn.
Yeah, you have to do that, I guess.
Takes and takes. Quite an equal game, but White pieces look slightly more active compared to black. And right now, black has to play a defensive move, protecting that g5, otherwise it's falling. So if rook to g8, and White's king is also comparatively active rather than black, king e2 is coming into the game, and I would say king f3, king g4, and then hitting that g5 pawn.
Yeah, rook and knight might be a better combination in this endgame.
Because the game is kind of here, it is stuck. It's not that open, it's not nice game, but also you protecting that rook coming into the game. Those squares are away, e8 is not joining into the game, so the rook remains being quite passive.
Yeah, those are the choices that black can have in this position, and of course there are more ways to. We just show one line here, and there are possibilities to take pawn on f2 first. And to play that position, but seems like it will go towards the more changes and more to the end game. Meanwhile, we can go forward and check out the next fourth board, because we do have actually only few pieces left.
Oh, wow!
And let's take a look what is the situation.
Oh, they have a result already. They drew the game.
The game has ended?
Yes, the game has ended. And they had a virtual check.
Okay. Yeah.
Quite fast finish. Okay, let's have a look. Guess the opening.
I know the opening. I know the line.
Yeah.
So I play also myself this one. Yeah.
Yeah, we have seen that quite this structure quite a lot today. Yeah. So we have seen bishop g5 move, e4, bishop h4, takes, bishop e7, takes, and pawn to g3. Are we still on the theory, or are we out of theory on this moment?
This is still theory. Until the end, it's still theory. The game's happening.
Yeah, yes. Bishop g2, knight takes b5.
Yeah, this is all the theory.
And queen going to a4, and it's quite much ending in a draw. Quite nice result for both players. And so far, I wouldn't say they had a lucky tournament, because they had 1 point out of 4. And they both had 2 draws so far, and they got their 3rd draw in the game, in the tournament, in this event.
Yeah, so this game is down, and now we're moving forwards to the board 3.
Okay, Nikolas Theodorou against Jakhongir Vakhidov. And interesting. I was expecting whole time knight f3 move by Nikolas Theodorou, and he played d4 move for the first time.
Yeah.
But after knight f6, he went with knight f3, just one move late. Okay, with maybe d4 move, he avoided any knight f3, c5 moves, as we have seen in the game of Andrew Hong and Ivanchuk. And it's Sicilian, but we have seen c4, e6, knight e3, bishop b4. Oh, quite interesting. This is today's, how many? It's already almost, I would say, 5th game we have seen this structure.
Yeah, that's true, actually. We have a lot of queen's gambit declined, Nimzo kind of position. And also, with e3 now.
Yeah, e3 now, and bishop to d3. We have take, and pawn to push to c5. Castle, takes, b6. Oh, that was a theory, I guess. Most of the players are within theory. Oh, and queen a4 move. Okay. An interesting thing is, with my students, we analyzed that bishop g5 line as the most common line, and queen a4 is something out of theory, I would say. But okay, bishop to e7. Bishop to b7. Okay, knight to e5. Queen to e8. Queen trade. Bishop to b5. Queen moving to c8. And bishop to g5. And the idea behind you wasting move with black is, after bishop b5, queen c8, you want to get that a6, b5 fast. So you're getting some moves as well. So we have seen bishop g5 move, and we can see quite much a6, b5 in the upcoming moves. And this the last piece development, knight b d7, and then rook joining into the game. Yeah, and white is playing with isolated pawn on d4. We were yesterday discussing being pro or against isolated pawn.
In this position, I think black has control over d5, so the pawn cannot be pushed. And also white needs to coordinate pieces more on the king side, like something like bishop d3 now, to get the queen back on c2 and e2. White needs to just get all the pieces on the other side, and then we will see the power of isolated.
Yes, white didn't move the rook yet. Maybe rook c1 to make some threats of knight e4.
Yeah, rook c1 also a possibility.
So
yeah, the game is on here. It's going to be a huge fight, and we're going to go to the last board. In this section, we do have Vitaly Sivuk against Mukhiddin Madaminov.
Game looks, they are out of English opening, just structurally I can tell. And let's have a look from the beginning. And we had c4, although the start was not c4, e5, but it was knight f6. But after knight c3, e5, we transform to that opening. We have knight f3, knight c6, g3, pawn to d5. Okay, inverted dragon. I don't know, I would call it like that. Is it called like that?
I don't really know how.
It's probably called something English, certain variation. Yes.
Yeah. Every line has such a weird names these days. I don't really know what are the names.
So, but in a simple sense, we can say that's how you play dragon. Yeah. So castle. This game reminds me. We had this structure earlier as well in previous rounds.
Yeah, Richard Rapport played, but he played something like
Queen to
A4.
C2. Queen to C2.
Queen C2,
yes.
then Queen A4, and then he came back on D1.
Came back, yes. Knight B4, then Queen A4, something like that, and then Bishop D7 against Yakubboev, yeah.
Yeah, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, so today we had a relatively normal and natural move that is just castle, D3, onto H6, Bishop to D2. Yes, quite natural, typical idea with what you play in Dragon, or in today's game it's like English, yeah. H3, knight to F6, B4, going back, knight to E1, knight maneuvering to E3 and D5, but it's like you do that knight C2, this, when that pawn is on C5. Or is it just to protect this, to adjust? But well, let's see, knight to D4. Okay, it was to kick out that knight on D4. Queen moves away, queen to C2. I'm a little bit confused with knight being on E1. What's its future? Where do you want to place that knight?
You worry too much about this knight. The knight can come back on F3, I guess. That was his idea, as you mentioned, to protect D3 pawn. And after knight to F3, then you have rook to D1, bishop to E1 to
strike on
coordinate the pieces like that, and then to eventually to get rid of the D3 pawn and attack the center.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a slow game here, so I think it's now time to go back to the Masters and check out what is happening. And the first game we can check out is Parham against Ian Nepomniachtchi. Too many things has happened.
Wow, they are closer to the end game. Yeah, interesting. So, I mean, if rook moves away, they exchange the knights. It's like they're getting to the rook end game, and maybe we can see maybe fast draw even in their game. Yeah. But besides that, Parham is probably thinking of being stubborn and keeping that pawn on D5 with rook F5.
Yeah, rook F5 is possibility, and after G6, actually you have to drop the pawn on F6. Let's make it on the board. After rook to E, can I do something like king to F7 to prepare G6?
Possible. And I guess you have to save your rook again, otherwise G6 is coming. So here, after king to F7, rook goes to H5, hitting that H7, and now if H6, my rook is comfortable because you cannot play G6 anymore, because H6 pawn drops. Another option you have is you have to get back with your king to G8. I mean, that's also possible as well. After king G8, the threat is again one more time G6.
Yeah, and if the rook moves away on E7, then what happens in that endgame? Instead of F5.
Instead of F5, rook D7 pretty much triggers the trades on D5 square. You take, quite nice. I mean, black is going after D4 pawn. You can play rook D1, but you will be slightly passive. And the active play would be A4, because if rook D4, there is a pin opening up. Yeah. And in case of take, you go to rook to C7. I guess you're hitting this pawn. Yeah. And you're getting that pawn back. So pretty much close to a draw.
Yeah, this game was very interesting from the very beginning.
Let's go back.
10 was the last time we saw this one.
F3.
Let's see how they
okay, castle, and we have seen that bishop D2 move, and that was C4. Okay. Yeah, so okay, we had that bishop f5, takes, b5 move, and white's strike with e4. You were saying that idea
Yeah, I know
earlier.
that this is not the best for black, because then you have e4 and it's a strong center and everything. But seems like Nepomniachtchi had some hidden weapon here to play against it.
Okay,
And what was
let's
that?
see. That
Queen
was
d7.
just trading the queens. Okay.
Why not
And
e5 there? You can play also e5.
after trade?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's possible as well. Going after the bishop, but it's the same point, you know. Now you close the game. Now you want to do, you know, what's your plan? You just put your pawns on the bishop square, and how you planning? Maybe f4, I would say, later on, but then maybe f5, f6 even. But while you're
but
doing
you are missing queen. You're missing queen off the board.
yes, while you're doing f4, I guess f6 would. I mean, considering first his bishop's gonna save, and if f4, f6. You don't have any f5, f6 plans anymore to get into the game, and yeah. Maybe there is a5, b4 counter plan for black to go against white's queen side, yeah, and going push pawn majority, and d5 pawn is already protected. Knight on c7 is quite well placed, I would say, yeah, protecting the pawn. Yeah. And in case of a4 strike, you can respond a6 or b4. Either way, it works out.
Yeah, so pawn takes d5 has happened here by Parham.
Oh no, first bishop.
Yeah, first
f4.
bishop f4.
Bishop f4, exchange, and knight going to b6. Oh, an interesting choice by Nepomniachtchi. He didn't trade the pawn. He let his opponent take his pawn because
Sorry.
bless you.
Sorry.
He wanted to get that isolated pawn on d5. Yeah. So Parham took. He is up a pawn. He's going rook to fe1, and we have seen a6. Okay, I wonder why he didn't take d5 pawn. He's ready to take the d5 pawn. So white's rook was active. That's why he decided not to take.
But you're dropping b5 if you take on d5.
Oh yeah, that's also true. So we're gonna start with the right pawn. I mean right knight taking the pawn. Takes.
Then you do wrong knight and you drop the pawn.
Yeah, and then I guess there is a counter attack, and b2 will be dropped. Yeah, I mean rook b8 is quite common idea, especially when you give up your b7 pawn. You know, bishop b7, rook b8, quite common moves. And here,
but if I play a4,
you gotta
a6, then knight a3.
You're going against c4. Yeah. I see. Yeah, so that was a deep one.
Yeah, I don't need to really have so much of struggle, right, with black, because a6 is just one move, and d5 pawn cannot be protected anyway.
Exactly. So Nepo went with a very simple choice of a6.
Yeah.
Okay, now it's very clear and understandable.
And you can play
why. Yes, and now you can take that. And in the meantime, it does let white to get to rook e5 and protect the pawn. But after f6, white is not feeling comfortable with rook on 5th rank, but Parham is still keeping the rook on 5th rank. And yeah, we can see like king f7 move, and even let's say black gives a move for white. It's gonna be probably getting to the 7th rank, white's idea. So probably in the meantime, even rook d7 move would protect.
You know what I'm thinking? How about knight e8 move?
And going to d6?
No, g6 and drop the rook.
G6 just kind of protecting. Oh, that's an interesting line. Yeah. You can move away with rook h5 because you just dropped attacker from c7 to e8. And another interesting thing is, can Parham go for sacrifice? No, still going to rook e1, and if g6, you give up because you have 2 pawns, and after that you have this
That's interesting.
good d pawn that can be pushed. Yeah.
That's interesting.
And you have good placement of knight here on e6.
Knight e4.
Yes, and
Knight
after,
f6.
yes.
Oh, I like that.
And maybe that's when knight a4 immediately, like, don't even come as a knight. But this makes black's pawn strategy a little bit not ideal. Takes, rook c6. But I would say it's totally playable and even kind of pushable for the win for both sides. Because rook c8, you give up the pawn on a6, but you have that counterplay of rook e1, rook b1, yeah, going against this pawn. Oh, things can go quite wild. Yeah.
Yeah, so interesting. Rook
Black's
f5.
position looks slightly better to me at this moment. Yeah.
Yeah, rook f5 is the Parham's choice. He has 40 minutes for 18 more moves. I don't think that's a time pressure for him in this game, or he had any, and we know that he's quite comfortable in the time pressure, as his part of his routine was to prepare in the blitz games. Even though we have off the pieces now in this game, we still have some chances to have a complicated game. Let's go now forward and check out how Pragg and Richard Rapport are doing. Because
they had quite an interesting game, and we see at the moment of pawn push to e4. Wow, that dark squared bishop is joining the game. Wow. There is some kind of beauty and dynamic showing Rapport, yeah, after yesterday's defeat.
This is a real Rapport, we know.
But we know Pragg is kind of amazing defender as well. Yesterday, how he was a kind of great fighter, both till the end, yeah. So let's see where we left off and how things continued. We left off on king a1, which was a strong move. Rook went to a4 to protect b4. There was knight going to c1, queen going to d7. Moves were done quite kind of faster. Yeah. Bishop to c4, all the computer is mentioning this as a mistake, but it is totally making sense that you're protecting your a2 pawn. Mm-hmm. The only thing maybe when black is developing rook c8, you're coming with a force, with an attack. But if you develop your bishop e2 after rook c8, you're allowing that rook c2 penetration on your camp. So it doesn't look good either. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting actually how accurate they are playing these moves. Yeah. Richard is taking a little bit more time. It's for about 40 minutes to be played and 40 minutes to have, and they still have to make how many moves? 20
more, yeah. They are right now at move 20, but the game is quite dynamic. I'm not sure if they reach move 40, you know, from here. No, the things can go turn. There could be some tactics, you know. Yeah, I'm expecting some tactical blow very soon, you know, in just 5 moves, maybe at most 5 to 10 moves. There will be some kind of tactical strikes on this position, because Richard is already down a piece and he has to make really, really fast moves.
Yeah, I agree with that. He has to make some fast moves. e4, opening up the bishop. Let's follow just the lines here, what we have.
So we have computers recommending simple development of rook, after which
can we have take a look of f takes e4 or
taking just the pawn immediately? Yeah. Okay, let's have a look. The straightforward line when white takes the pawn, although it exposes this, but Richard Rapport is not thinking about getting that exchange back. He's not caring about the material. The only thing he's focusing is white's king. That's why he gave away that piece earlier. And
what's the suggestion?
He can strike his pawn to b3.
And if I
take with a knight?
Then bishop is hanging. So you play bishop g4 and bishop c4.
Yes, if bishop takes.
If bishop takes.
He takes rook takes e4. The comeback with rook b4. Strikes that knight.
That's why you're keeping the bishop on f5.
Yes. And I would say once Richard Rapport takes that knight on b5, he's going to equalize the material, and he has so many attacks going on in the position.
Yeah, b3 is a very powerful move. Very powerful move.
So keeping even the pawn on e4 so that you don't take. Let's see what Engine is suggesting is just rook goes to he1. But still, b3 looks very powerful. After take, you are attacking the knight. You are taking the knight. There is no safe square. If you go to knight c3, we can see the rook takes c3 move.
Wow.
Takes.
Bishop takes and f takes.
King b1, yeah, takes, and yeah, winning the queen.
Wow, that's crazy. That's a bit crazy.
But Pragg has a way to save his knight, and that is going to knight to a3, the other way around. Yeah. And Rapport can continue with queen to a7, hitting that knight. And yeah, game is still unclear, I would say. But his pieces are still active. Look at every single piece. But he has to be accurate.
So after e4, is there a way to stop b3 happening?
You cannot push yourself pawn b3. You cannot make bishop b3.
Why?
Oh, bishop b3 actually possible. I was thinking maybe rook a5. But then knight to d4, rook c1, takes. But turns out even first you can open up your bishop as black and then do those actions. Take, oh, wait a sec. I just dropped the knight. Takes, rook a5, knight to d4, takes. Right now it's transformed from being down a piece to down an exchange, but he got one extra pawn.
I think this is the most practical chance for white here.
Possible.
I think, yeah, because you are kind of eliminating black's pieces. And
but the attackers are still on the board. Have a look at that.
The attackers are still on the board, but you are not checkmated.
Yeah, you're not getting
you
that's
survive.
good. That's good.
Let's come back again and check out what else we have. Because I don't believe rook hg1 will be the move.
hg1, yeah, it's a very computerish. Like, what are you doing? Like, there are all threats on the board, and you just I'm going to give out my rook.
So once again, f takes c4, b3.
b3, and rook is getting in, and that knight is exposed.
Can I take the bishop then? So
takes b3 and takes, yes. Okay, there is a bishop trade, as we earlier said. After b3, rook is opening up to go after c4.
All right.
And now your knight on b5 is under attack. Yeah. If you take knight b3, the pawn, you're losing your knight. So if you protect it going to knight to a3, I would say there is rook c2 hitting queen and
c2?
Yes, because another rook is joining in.
Oh my goodness.
Two rooks.
Wait, that's fine, because I can take.
Take.
And
you want to take again?
there's rook d2, bishop b2, king b1.
Yeah, there are some deeper calculation, but there is a way to put almost a checkmate in white's king. And that is not necessarily with bishop b2, but it would be on a2 square, but knight is protecting that a2 square. But we have to consider that there is a huge pin.
Ah, yeah. Takes and queen a4.
Takes and queen a4, yes. And queen a4. And now, very close to checkmate. a3 doesn't save the game. Check and mate. Wow.
Yeah, tough. But there is... take b3.
Let's see. He takes f5, rook takes c4. White dynamic.
After seeing all these lines, Pragg might feel that he's very, very bad here, and Richard might think that he's
pushing. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
And it's very important how the players are evaluating this position, because your decisions will be based on that, right? If you feel that you are worse, you are lost, you will just try to find the only moves.
Yes, I would say.
Wow, this game is really interesting. Like really, really, really interesting.
Richard,
Four is a strong move.
Yeah, Rapport Richard is feeling comfortable in this game, and he just made his e4 move, opening up his dark squared bishop. And we know Black doesn't have dark squared bishop already on the game, so that bishop solely kind of makes a huge difference.
What if I play knight d4 here?
Blocking. Yeah, that-
blocking, I want to get knight c6.
Okay, let's have a look. Knight to d4, blocking.
I would
Takes,
say
takes.
something like queen a7 maybe, or
Yeah, since you just blocked the rook, I don't have rook e4 anymore, you know, at that b3 calculation. So I'm kind of thinking of taking first. Because of that, there is no rook e4, there is no any ideas as previously line we calculated on b3.
okay, if I take it.
With a queen,
Pawn.
you drop the rook. Okay, with a pawn probably, that's more likely. But besides that, there is knight takes possible as well.
Yeah, I take with the pawn because the knight is blocking
The bishop. Yeah. And I'm trying to make that b3 useful. But b3, I see that knight c6, even that there is no queen a7. Yeah, this knight is protecting. This knight is getting really good actually on c6 square.
After b3, I don't know if it's correct or not, but I also have bishop b5.
Oh yes, that's also possible. But I'm considering rook c1, rook a2.
ये सब अवार्ड्स रोहन के नहीं, उसके दादाजी के हैं। आज शायद रोहन जीत न पाए, पर रोहन ने 2 महीने में जो सीखा है, उससे आज उसने अपने दादाजी को नानी याद दिला दी।
Checkmate.
क्योंकि जीतने से बड़ा है सीखना, और सीखते रहने की शक्ति देता है प्योर हेरिटेज मिल्क, जिसके क्वालिटी एक्सपर्ट्स रोज करते हैं 25 से ज्यादा क्वालिटी टेस्ट, ताकि मिल्क रहे एकदम प्योर। हेरिटेज प्योर।
That king with your own pawn, you don't have progress anymore. You don't have any rook a2, you don't have any rook c1. Yeah, it's not an easy idea anymore. The only thing is, okay, e file opened up. Maybe you have to, as a black, readjust your pieces. And considering all those factors, I'm like, I don't want to have this knight on the board as black. You know, this knight is causing me so much trouble. So I want to do that b3 idea, but maybe I have to get rid of that. Knight first, take, then b3. Now look at that.
I know. Bishop d4 is not the move, I promise you. Who will give up this bishop?
Sure. But when your idea is clear, when you made your calculation, you can go for that move. The next move is this is pin and b5.
No,
No.
I don't believe it. I'm sorry, but I don't
Yeah,
believe it. If I play a3 there,
But it would be too much to leave this knight on the board. You know,
give up the dark square bishop.
I mean, you want that knight to be on c6, and I guess you don't have any ideas anymore.
No, this is too engine line. I don't believe it. Wait, okay, so our suggestion is knight d4, right, for Pragg? So far.
So far, yes. No, the thing is, earlier on b3, that knight on c6 becoming so powerful, so I'm like, I want to make that b3 idea. Tell me how I can make that b3 idea.
Yeah, because you see the engine, they don't see the engine. That's the difference. I don't believe this is the real move, bishop d4, that Richard will play.
Yeah, another way to play b3 would be maybe with rook takes e4.
This is more logical.
More logical.
Yeah.
So tell me the ways that I can push the b3. If takes, that also looks good. Yeah. And now, if queen moves away, that d4 is dropping. And the only move that is not dropping the knight would be queen to c3. And maybe queen to a7. I would double up because rook a2, I'm kind of going for a checkmate.
Yeah, I think Pragg has the difficult times. Second day in a row. Ivanchuk keeping coming back to see this game.
Because the game looks so interesting. It's like you playing. Richard sacrificed the piece in a.
That's a very nice way. Very stylish.
Very nice way, yeah.
Very stylish. Yeah, Pragg might not be comfortable, you know, to have tough defense in 2 games in a row. I see the 2 Nodirbek games is also progressing. Let's take a look at that too, and we'll come back to the Pragg game.
Bishop pair looks good. The game is open. The bishops are functioning is really, really good at this game. So, yeah, Yakubboev is out of his chair.
Seems like few last moves were a bit inaccuracy. We can take a look. Last few moves, what happened?
Okay, let's go back a little bit on that a3 moment. Takes, queen. Okay, queen to d6. That was how c5 pawn was protected. Bishop to e2, bishop to e4. Queen to d2, rook f d8. and a4. Queen to c6, hitting g2 pawn, and f3, defending the pawn, bishop to g6, bishop hitting on b5, the queen moving away, bishop a3, quite natural move, triggering the exchange. And here he went for the exchange. Only it's a mistake, it was a trigger, that bishop a3 move just now. There was another idea for Abdusattorov, that is, since bishop is the only defender of the pawn, to kick that bishop out and then take that a4. But he's losing his c5 pawn as well. We're leaving him with isolated pawn. Let's say bishop to f1, queen c5, bishop takes c5, and that c6 is still on the board, and c5 and f1, bishop pair still acting really, really nice.
Yeah, wow, this might be the current position, might be really tough for Nodirbek Abdusattorov. As you can see, the engine bar somehow favors here white pieces because of the bishop's open position, the pass pawn on a file, and also the final move, queen to c1. We see that there is a
really strong move here.
Yeah, marked as a strong move. The pawn on c7 is hanging, and the pawn on e5 is also hanging. So yeah, the time situation not so bad for none of the players, but Nodirbek has to be a bit careful here in this one, not to increase the issues on the board.
Yeah, but which Nodirbek?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have both Nodirbeks on the board now. I kind of noticed that the people who have the advantage, they walk a lot in that way. So, and the others, like if you have to defend, they are like sitting down and they are like trying their best to figure it out.
Well, let's have a look at the last move, because that e5 move was played within 15 seconds. This was quite fast. And I would say maybe queen c1 was a miss. You know, Abdusattorov Nodirbek missed queens.
We have to analyze, because like
queen
at this
c1
point, I see the pawn on d4 is also hanging. So let's take a look.
So e takes d4, the most possible line. There is t7, pawn is hanging. So if queen takes c7, there is, the rooks are joining in and the pawn is on d3.
D3, yeah.
So it's likely that Yakubboev wouldn't take the pawn. It looks like it's giving the chances for...
What is that? Bishop e7?
Bishop e7, another line, yes. That rook looks uncomfortable. It doesn't have
Rook
a lot of
d5.
space to go.
Bishop c6.
If rook d5, immediate bishop c6, yes.
Wait a moment. Is black just losing the exchange? There is rook c8.
There is one move that is going to c8 that leaves d4 unguarded.
Okay.
You can take it immediately, but I would even prefer, like as a positional play, to leave the opponent with no moves, make him passive and then take that rook takes d4, because it is there. In case of queen a7 protects, you have that bishop c5. And then if queen moves a6, you can take with bishop, that your bishop is protected, and that rook on c8, pawn on c6, c7, they are not doing much. Yeah.
Oh, wow. This is actually serious. Bishop e7 is the move that white will not... Okay, how about I take the rook d4?
With a... Oh, yes.
Here.
After here. Yeah, that would be much better, maybe, but we have to evaluate. Because now on queen c7, there is no threat, because you are threatening e5 pawn once you take on c7. So black has to take care of e5 pawn once queen c7. Earlier we explored rook b8, but that pawn on e5 was already on d4. And now if you go for rook c8, it's a free pawn for white. And the actor pawn is on a4. That means like you're going to promote that pawn. That's like straightforward. And considering two bishops on the board, game is quite open. Even advantage goes beyond just pawn.
I do have a question. Like, instead of giving up the pawn on c7, e5, do I have some kind of
You don't have rook e8 to protect. E8 is already guarded.
No. I was thinking more of e4.
E4.
You know what's the problem here? If I take the rook on d1,
Immediately?
yes, and rook d1 and play e4 to get rid of
Uh-huh.
it. Bishop c6 is
Yes, trapping the queen.
I don't have a move.
Yeah, you move away with queen, your rook will drop. Yeah.
So that's why rook c8, yeah.
Yes. But you're dropping e5 pawn, so it looks bad as well. And immediately e4, you're just giving up that rook on d4, you're dropping that rook on d4.
Wow, this is actually more serious than I thought. If those lines are not working for Nodirbek Abdusattorov, then after queen to c1, not only the pawn on c7 is hanging, but pawn on also e5 is hanging.
And bishop e7 is also kind of one idea that could be the port as well.
So again, if pawn takes on d4, there is a bishop e7 move, and white is getting a serious advantage with these bishops. Oh wow, the things can go really ugly for Abdusattorov. Let's move to the next board, Arjun Erigaisi against Sindarov. We do have quite tense
Wow, look at
situation.
that.
The move h5, you are so brave to play pawn h5 when queen is on the king side and
you're willing
you have
to open up.
pieces there and you just play h5. We have to dive into this position.
Okay, there haven't been any bishop g4 and bishop f3 moves on this game. You know, earlier we explored. The knights are still on the board. But how come king came to f2? But considering rook on f1, there was a castle. So let's go back.
We have to take very quickly what happened just to have the idea.
Okay, so takes, f4, h3, okay.
Yeah, stop in g4 actually.
So,
After
okay.
f4, you have to play here h6.
Yes, there wasn't any h6 or bishop g4, but there was bishop e7. Earlier line you mentioned, and more or less we came to the same scenario.
Same scenario, so it was a little slight inaccuracy, I think, to stop that. Because now white goes with h3, controls g4 square. Black is kind of forced to, like after castle in g4, to play g6.
To play g6,
Yeah. And then what we had?
We have knight to f3 back,
Knight e8,
knight
queen
e8,
c2.
queen c2, and knight to d6. Queen to g2, and pawn to h4.
So there was a pawn sacrifice as well. But if you take the pawn bishop h4, then after g5, you just lock the bishop here and it's lost. So this didn't happen. We had king to h8, king f2.
King f2. Okay, I mean h5.
He wants to open up the rook h1 and h5, and h5 directly.
H5 is coming slowly. To be clear, why h5 was done, because after takes, g takes, bishop g4, your bishop is kind of fixed, and then you go to rook g8. In case of knight e5, maybe first queen to f8, maybe you have to protect, then pushing pawn to f5, and h4 is dropping actually. Yeah, knight e5 is not possible. H4 is even dropping. So yeah, the idea that
let's show it on the board.
Okay,
to make it more clear.
takes, probably rook g1 and bishop to g4, that blocks. And your knight cannot move away because h4 pawn is dropping.
So you cannot react with capture. What about f5 if I want to stop the bishop? Not here, no.
Here, you wanna, isn't it giving up a free pawn?
No. After h5.
Here.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
point being that if you take the pawn on a5, I take the pawn on h5. But
Yes.
here the thing is that
You're still dropping h4, I would say, maybe, additionally.
yeah, I think the most problem about f5 is that black can take first on g4.
G4 and then f5,
Then
yes.
after queen takes on g4, then black can take with a piece.
Yes.
Either knight or bishop to trade as much pieces as possible. And then you can play king g7, rook h8 and go after h4.
Yes.
Yeah.
Quite safe. Yeah, quite kind of counter-attacking.
All right, so that leaves us another candidate move after h5 to play g5.
To block. Okay.
But black should be very happy with this because all the whites attack now, it's just
The end of, yes.
slow down.
And yeah, we can see that he white ended up with e3 pawn, and slowly black can make pieces towards e3, and the queen is slightly kind of misplaced as well, and it's kind of king is around here, and if black is fast enough, he would get advantage like by pressuring e3 pawn more and more.
Do you think so? Because I have 95 to cover that.
Maybe
There is
like
also
e5
not
moves,
enough
d2,
pieces
d4.
to attack that.
Maybe c5, if takes, maybe d4.
C5 here?
No, not necessarily here. Here, I want to get to e3, how I can get to that. And knight f5 meets bishop takes f5. So maybe bishop f5 first, if takes. I'm kind of already have one piece on e3, and I want to place my rook on e8. But there is some kind of c5 take and d4. That's what I was implying earlier. c5, d4.
Well, out of all the moves what white has here, I think g5 is most logical to close the position, because it seems like if white opens up the g file, it's not white's game. We have to come back to the current position.
Let's go back.
Here, yeah, I'm talking about here.
Yes, g5, yes.
It seems to be played because like you can't afford to open up the files here because white's king is also in danger.
One thing I noticed is maybe white can let his opponent take h4 pawn, because after take, rook g1, bishop g4 earlier we mentioned. Knight e5 we said not possible, but look at that king. Even you're giving up that h4 pawn, you have some checkmate ideas right there, you know. It doesn't look that smooth for black to play. There is a threat of knight takes g4 as well.
Yeah, you know,
maybe queen to h2. Yeah.
This I agree with that, but am I forced to take the bishop h4?
Yeah, no, yes,
No.
you're not forced.
I'm not.
Yes.
Just the fact that you open up the position, you can never take these pieces back, the pawns back. So black can find here some intermediate moves, which can just...
Yeah, his pawn on f7 is protected. I would say rook has the freedom to move.
Yeah, rook g8 or something like that.
Yes.
And the pawn on h4 will remain.
Remain, yeah. This is kind of an interesting pawn. It seems like dropping, but once bishop h4, it's like there are checkmate ideas on the board. Especially
I love the way how Sindarov is like answering to the attack with h5. This is out of all the basic ideas of chess to push the pawn where you are weak on this side, but look at that, it's just working, and it's based on the calculation, which is very important. So we're expecting Arjun to make the move here, and let's see what he will decide. Will he decide to close the center king side? Will he decide to
take an open,
accept the challenge and take the pawn? We'll come back to that. Both are possibilities, and both has ups and downs. Then we are going forward to check out the game of
Aravindh against Shamsiddin.
Yeah, let's take a look at this.
that.
Yeah, let's take a look of that.
Because it seems they are close to the end game as well.
There we go.
Rooks are out of the board, and they again playing queens. Okay, bishop pair for Aravindh, but he has double pawns, and I would say I would give slightly more space advantage for black on this game. Yeah.
B4 has been just played. Closing the queen side as well.
All the bishop pair advantage. Look at this bishop, not doing much, and look at this bishop. It doesn't have.
Yeah, maybe
attacking
bishop
power.
d1. That's a good
Yes,
point.
bishop
Bishop
d1.
d1 to chase the knight.
I mean, black would be willing to trade as well if white's idea is to trade, because those pawns are still on the light squares and double pawns still exist on the board, and this bishop has no way of getting to this d6 pawn, but that from g4 there is that bishop d1 move still. If these variations happen, let's say we give away the move, any move, takes, there is a way to get in to bishop e2. If you move to queen b2, there is bishop to d1. So the bishop in that opposite colored way, black bishop has a better chances compared to white.
Bishop is on d1.
So do they have
I
a
don't
move?
know if, yeah, bishop d1. I don't know if Aravindh is planning to give up the bishop, or maybe he just wants to rotate this bishop to the king side, because center and the queen side is closed and there is no business for this bishop anymore. Bishop might come on f3 in this position. Next can be something, I was thinking about queen a5, queen d8 to get this queen also activated.
Okay, for black, I would say black has nothing left to do on the queen side. You know, he fixated the pawns. So maybe black should slowly change his focus to white's king side. And looking at this pawn, my main target is, first one is on e3, the second one on being g2. I want my queen to be on g5, not on b7 anymore.
Bean burrito and creamy aloo panini. Mera kamal.
Iska Kamal. Fun Foods Veg Mayonnaise by Dr. Oetker. Now also in Strawberry.
Would protect e3 as well. Also the pieces. Yeah, well, black can make those progressions, but white's placement of his queen on e2 would take care of those attacks. So black has to figure out something more from here, I would say.
Yeah, queen e7 is on the board.
Yeah, queen
and
e7 is on
queen
the
goes
board.
towards the g5, and now it is Aravindh's turn to make the decision how he wants to guard all those weaknesses. And meanwhile, we do have the update in the Pragg and Rapport game, and we have the move that we were actually talking earlier.
And that's bishop to b3.
Yeah, there was first trade the pawns and then bishop to b3, hitting the rook, and Richard is taking a sip of water and thinking he enjoys so much to have this position. This is so good position for him.
And yeah, I would say I would give you a credit, because you said this is the most practical line that would likely to happen, and it is happening on the board.
Yeah.
And rook a5, knight b4, we just explored this line where white slowed down black's attack and things are looking more practical. But of course, black got extra pawn as well on this variation. So which means right now, after getting that just being exchanged down, it is bishop and a pawn for a rook. And yeah, white is kind of defending, but black is still pushing for the attack. His pieces are still attackers, and he has bishop pair, which is his piece coordination, and having bishop pair gives more compensation than just a point being down.
Yeah, another game that is quite interesting, Arjun Erigaisi and Sindarov. Here we have also the move that has been played. Arjun decided to keep the pawns that way and played knight to e5, and we will see 2 question marks here for this knight. So his idea was that after bishop to g4, that actually happened on the board, he wanted to take it back with the queen, with the knight, pawn takes, and queen takes on g4. And he's claiming that I want to push h5 next move to open up the h file if you want.
But in the meantime,
that you can capture it with a check. But I don't know, it's so risky. Let's say bishop takes on h4.
Yeah, it's Sindarov's turn, and
king goes.
You're checking, which means you are move ahead, which means you have a time to place.
Yeah, that's the point. King goes on g2 or f3.
Maybe on e2 you kind of take care of.
Yeah,
this
somewhere.
pawn.
Let's put
It seems
somewhere.
safe.
We'll figure it out.
King to
g7,
g7.
rook h1, and you are on time to play rook h8 as well.
Yes. Oh, interesting moves. Yeah. And computer harshly evaluated Arjun's move, knight to e5. It is not necessarily a blunder. I would say it's still after the taking on h5 or g5, it would be the third choice to go for knight to e5.
Yeah, this is because of the bishop h4 check, yeah? You're giving up the pawn, but I don't know, in practical game,
yes.
bishop h4 is not your problem.
How comfortable you are to leave your king on h8 while g5 is, you know, it's covered.
You somehow also trust your opponent when your opponent plays knight e5. You just believe that bishop h4 is not a good move. So, and also, like, I just moved the rook king away, and then rook h1 is next move.
Yes. But I guess the point of why bishop h4 being so good is after king e2 you take, you're not letting g file to open up. After knight g4, you're still keeping that bishop pair, you're not taking bishop g4. You may be doing bishop f5 move, or just king g7 first and then bishop f5.
Yeah.
But knight on e5 is still powerful, it's still double-edged, you know?
All right, in the game we do have actually some more moves, and after taking on h4, queen to c8 has been played. A queen offering the trade.
Okay, there was no taking on h4 pawn. Wow. I was expecting at some moment there would be h4 pawn dropping, but
would you take this pawn in your game
h4
against Arjun Erigaisi?
Against Arjun Erigaisi.
I would not dare to
If
take
possible, you know, it is better for me not knowing that on the other side there is Arjun, you know.
But you know your opponent.
Yeah, I know, but let's say if I don't have that knowledge, let's say I'm playing online game, and on online game you can, you know.
But you still know who's your opponent.
Make your opponent anonymous, yeah. If my opponent is anonymous, I would be comfortable to take bishop h4. But if it is Arjun, I'm like, what he's planning, you know, what I'm missing, you know? That would be my question.
The thing is that
इंडिपेंडेंस चक्की आटा, इसमें है शरबती आटा। अब पाएं स्वादिष्ट टिफिन सॉफ्ट रोटियां जो रहे घंटों मुलायम। खाने में समझौता नहीं, अच्छा खाना शुरुआत से ही। इंडिपेंडेंस।
h4 as a weakness in the future, which makes all the sense.
There is a f5 idea, you know, maybe he was kind of, because after take, we explored that variation, but we didn't go extra move deep in it. We said king here, rook h1, but besides rook h1, there was an f5 move that is hitting on g6, you know, you're taking, and probably for that reason, Sindarov didn't go for bishop h4.
Yeah, no, I don't blame for this one. I would never take the pawn on h4 too. Rook to c8 has been played. It is white to move now, and what white can do is to perhaps to
he can still do f5. He can still avoid queen trade.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, there is, if take queen h5, check rook g1, you know, coming.
Yeah, I think Arjun will keep the queen on the board.
Yeah, another line is that there is a queen trade happening, but on pawn structure you get double that pawn and you get worse on that f5.
Another thing, like if you play queen to g3 and keep the queens on the board, you will fall for knight f3, and you have to calculate if it's worthy or not to do that.
Knight to f5?
Sorry, knight f5.
Yes. And after which you have to take.
Yeah.
More
Without the light square bishop, this attack is not so powerful.
You don't have any h5 anymore. And
queen c2 is another thing you have to watch out.
Simply
so that's why queen g3 is not a possibility, and Arjun can either take the queen on c8 or to play f5.
Exactly. f5 looks more kind of positional because it takes, king e2, you have a clear goal that is doubling up your rook on f file. And although you pawn down, his king is kind of exposed, black's king. You're not dropping any h4 pawn, so actually you're not even pawn down. Yeah. So you're taking that f5 back, you're not dropping h4.
Looks quite pleasant because of the f7 pawn, and this knight might have some nice squares to jump around, like when the rooks are
you gotta bring that knight on e5.
Yeah, knight g1, knight f2, knight d3, but in a long term. We do have more dynamic situations on the other board. Nodirbek Abdusattorov decided to give up the exchange in his game.
So we have seen queen to c1 move, e takes d4, bishop e7, and queen a7.
I like this decision because
You're
if he-
about to push, yeah.
Yeah, if he plays a passive rook to c8, we know that Yakubboev don't ask him second time to
Yes.
convert that.
There
And
wouldn't be
what-
much counterplay.
Yeah, exactly. And with this one, you are keeping the pawn on d4. You are keeping the pawn on c7 as well. Of course, you are giving up the exchange, but you still have some ideas to roll the pawns.
Yes. As white, however, I would be unwilling to take that d8 rook still.
Really?
Yes, because I have idea of bishop c5 and taking that pawn back.
Okay.
I would rather take back the pawn and keep the game on my own side rather than giving counter ideas for opponent. Yeah.
Okay, let's analyze. This is more or less clear that you are forcing queen to go back or to b7 and you take the pawn back, and
yes.
white has slightly, maybe even better.
Even better, you have bishop pair, you have a4 pawn, you have bishop c6 just pushing, that's also winning.
Yeah, but let's see what happens if
bishop d8?
takes. Yeah, of course.
Okay, bishop d8, that does require calculation. So you gotta be clear on your decision, takes. And there are several decisions, but all of them would be allowing d3. And one move that doesn't allow d3 would be bishop to d3, but bishop d3 doesn't look good. You wanna kind of have that bishop so that you have counterplay and that pushing pawn ability to a8.
Yeah, but that's also fine to push d3, right? If I play king to h1, if you push d3, it will be my target.
Yeah,
I'll play rook
yes,
a3 next
yes. So maybe he's gonna kind of double up and keep his pawns connected for a while. And he has the e3 square for his knight to get into. And then push c4. Whoa, it looks kind of not ideal. Yes, for white to face these issues.
So after c5, you can still have to stop that with bishop to c4. Knight
yes.
jumps.
To d5, yes. And maybe now you take it.
Yeah.
You take it. You cannot afford having that knight on e3. Takes, queen c4, you fixate these pawns. Yeah. It's still kind of better for white. There is probably some pawn push. And then getting that rook to b7, but there is a bishop, so you cannot get on.
Yeah, so white has to evaluate this position here and the position where he just gets the pawn on d4, and then he has to make decision upon that.
Yes. So because this line is still giving counterplay, I would consider the bishop c5 as high candidate move as well to keep your advantage. To not let black have any counter ideas that might result in actually even you losing this game. Earlier we have seen that how his knight on e3 becomes so dangerous with his pawn push.
Well, Yakubboev, he has 40 minutes, a bit more than 40 minutes to figure it out, to make his decision. Both moves, bishop to c5 and bishop to d8, leads him in the advantage in the position. So he has to just choose now between these two moves. And a game between Parham Maghsoodloo and Ian Nepomniachtchi actually is getting more and more interesting.
Wow. Let's have a
One
look
might
at
thought
the
this game would end earlier in a draw, but no, they have just decided to play further.
Wow, interesting. And it looks like Parham decided to give up a pawn for a little, but wait a second. Right now, Jan looks ahead of a pawn, but how did we reach this position?
Yeah, so we had I think rook f5 and knight e8. I saw this knight a8 being there.
Oh, rook d7.
Rook d7,
So
yes.
that's stopping any rook e1, rook e7 ideas. And we saw d6. Okay, Parham giving the pawn away and getting his rook on c5. And then striking pawn on b5.
When he played probably rook to f5, he told himself, no, I cannot treat my rook like this. I have to open up my rook and I have to give up my pawn for that.
No, I mean, I like Parham's idea as well. You hitting that b5 pawn, yeah. And after b4, you hitting that rook, and I guess, okay, knight here. And then I was expecting some kind of a5 move. And then take that c4 back. That pawns are on a different basically they're not supporting each other, they're not together. They are away from each other, so which means there are some weaknesses Parham can go after. But the question is, what if rook d6? Can you make immediately a5? Oh, wait, sorry. What if rook d5? Can you make immediately a5? You cannot. I guess you cannot, because you're not winning that c4 pawn, because rooks are being exchanged right now. So I guess Parham's idea is just move down, hit that, b6 knight, so that if it moves away, you can go after c4 pawn, and I guess we have a5. Okay, we have a5. If knight moves away, it's more likely to be rook takes c4.
Very interesting endgame, and it's gonna be more and more complicated after the pawn drops from c4. The game is on. Black has to still watch out for some of the weaknesses. We're coming back to the game of Praggnanandhaa and Rapport. We don't have any updates in this game. Rook has been played on a5, and Richard, we have seen him walking a lot and observing other games. Pragg has 35 minutes, Richard has 28 minutes, and they still have to make 18 more moves. So we're gonna take our next break now, and we're gonna leave this game and this board as well. So guys, while we have a break, you will be observing the updates of the game, and we'll be back shortly with more moves.
See you soon.
बोल बोल के थक गया।
क्या हुआ?
नया किडबैक चाहिए।
तो पहले कैप्टन से बोलो, नहीं सुना तो मैनेजर से।
करेक्ट।
तो ऐसे ही पहले शिकायत बैंक से करें, 30 दिनों में जवाब या समाधान ना मिलने पर CMS पोर्टल पे शिकायत करें। तो पहले बैंक फिर CMS पोर्टल, नहीं तो शिकायत होगी नामंजूर। चले ले आ गया ना किडबैक।
RBI कहता है
पहले अपना बैंक फिर RBI ओम्बुड्समैन।
For all my dreams, grace and beauty. What a girl, I've got to do it all. What a girl, I'm on top of the world. What a girl, take them all for a swirl. What a girl,
Loved by millions.